Good morning again, crafty friends. I am back today with the second part of our third month of 12 months of wholeness through creativity. And this month we're making encouragement cards. In the first video, I gave you all the basics of getting your card base, the folding part of your card, how to do that, and how to make a simple card based on just squares and rectangles. The card to the right here is another one that I've got up in the blog post that's made with just rectangles, very simple. Today I'm going to go through some different techniques. We're going to learn some different things we can do. We're going to make a card similar to this one and just adding in a few more supplies and a few more different things that we can use to fancy our cards up just a little bit. Now, in this card here, like I said, it's nothing but rectangles, and you can just cut your rectangles straight out of with your paper trimmer or your scissors or whatever. Nothing to this but the layers. The sizes are all in the blog post, and a large sentiment that you can put on here. I did use dies to cut my rectangles. As you notice, they've got a little stitched edging to them. So I did use dies to cut them out. It also gave them a rounded corner. But if you just cut your rectangles by hand, you can also use a very simple corner punch that'll give you that little rounded edge just for a little nicer finish on your card. So those are a couple of things that you can do for a basic, very simple card. Again, like I said, the one today we're going to do is a little more intricate, and I'm going to add in a few more processes and techniques even than I used on this one. But this one is a spinner card, and your sentiment or picture or whatever here in the opening is on invisible thread, and it's double-sided. You spin it up, close it. When you put it in the envelope and closed, it's just like this. When you open it, it spins, and you've got a design on the inside too. So the card we're going to make today is somewhat like this one. And this video, depending on how long it gets, might be broken into different parts, showing the different techniques. And the first of those techniques I'm going to show you is for what we're going to use in the spinner of the card today are butterflies. And so to get these various colored backgrounds, we're going to do what's called ink smushing. And I'm just going to be doing it on regular cardstock paper. As you notice, the paper's a bit warped. Cardstock is not made to hold much water, and I'm not using watercolor paper. If you have that on hand, you certainly can use that, but I just wanted to show you that this can be done with just your basic cardstock that you've already got on hand at home. And so what you need for this is you need some water reactive dye inks, and the paper that I'm going to use for the background of today's card is this pretty design from Prima's romance novel pack, 6x6. I think I said in the other video that 6x6 pads are a good size to use for cards because they've got smaller images on them that work well for our smaller cards. So with these colors here, I thought the picked raspberry would be a good one. We're going to use spiced marmalade, and we're going to use peacock feathers. So these are the Tim Holtz Distress inks, which are my favorite inks of all to use. I love the Distress line of things, but that's probably because I love that more vintage style. So I'm going to use just some scratch paper. I've already got it. It's already a little bit inky. But to do this process of ink smushing, all you do is you press your pad of ink onto your work surface. This is a Ranger Craft Mat, which is a non-stick surface. So inks, adhesives, everything wipes up very easily from it. Add a little bit of water, and we're just going to smush Just exactly what the technique sounds like. Smush our paper into that ink and get it covering there. Once we've got that first color laid down, wipe up your surface, and we're going to use our heat tool to dry this. If we put all the colors on at the same time, they would start running together and we get a muddied brown color, but as long as we dry between layers, our colors will stay true to their color. So I'm going to use my regular heat tool again. Again, this isn't a hair dryer. A hair dryer might work fine for this technique. As we talked about last time, it's not hot enough and forceful direct air to do the heat embossing, which we're already doing. So this is our craft heat tool. As you noticed, if I as I dried, it started curling up, but if I turned it over, I could get it to uncurl again. Okay, next color we're going to add is our peacock feathers. Again, spray and smush, smush, smush. Obviously, when you do this, every time you do it is going to come out differently. Even if you use the same colors, you're going to have different designs. And I just find these are good for backgrounds. These are good for small embellishments to give some color into them. So wipe my mess up again and dry the blue color. And the last color I'm going to use on this one is the picked raspberry. The sprayer I'm using is a distress sprayer. You could use any water sprayer that you have, but what I like about this one is if you squeeze it, you get a fine mist. If you squeeze really slow, you'll get bigger water droplets, and so it's easier to do some other different techniques that we like to do in our paper crafting. You could keep going with this, adding other layers, other colors, as much as you want. Just get it to where you like the design of it. I'm happy with how this one is looking so far, so I'll probably stop there. Alrighty, and as you saw with some of my other ones, this one was more covered completely. This one has more splotches. This one is more of a watercolorish look. This one, I just did the corner here, and again, more colored, and but using the exact same colors that I did here. So just different designs, the way you use it, and just work with them until you come up with some, save them behind. For working on other projects, you'll have plenty of background and embellishment designs ready to use. So we're going to go ahead and work on, let's finish this up, I guess, before we move on. So the next thing we want to do is find where do we want to stamp our butterflies onto this one. And the ink I'm going to use this time is a little bit different. We are going to do some embossing, heat embossing again on these ones. So we'll do that in just a bit. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my butterfly and just kind of lay it around, see where has a design and colors that I think I'm going to want to use for this one. You can put it anywhere you want. You can work it out by deciding like this, or you can just randomly put it on and do your cutting. Like I said, we're going to do our stamping first before we do our die cutting. And this time I'm going to use VersaFine ink. Remember last time we used the Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink, a watermark ink, which is great for heat embossing. This time I want to do clear embossing, so I want to stamp my butterflies in the black. VersaFine is a pigment detail ink, which is great for this. Pigment inks don't dry as fast, and so they can be really good ones to use for your heat embossing. So I'm just gonna use my anti-static bag all over while I decide where I'm gonna cut from. And I'm gonna tap, 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 tap my little butterfly there. And let's see, I think there looks like a good spot to do one. And maybe there. And let's do one more. I've got plenty for our card already, but we'll just get a few more here. Let's try there. Okay, so you can see that all of the butterflies have different coloring to them in that way. Alrighty, next thing we want to do is do our heat embossing. So we're going to need our embossing powder. Again, I pour it over just a scrap piece of paper so that I can put all the excess back in, and then this will last you a really long time. So, and again, with this pigment ink, I've got this little bit of time here. I've got that little window of time to get the embossing powder on before the ink starts to dry. Funnel the excess powder back into the jar. As we talked about last time, embossing powders melt and turn into a nice shiny kind of plasticky coating on this. So again, we're going to bring out our heat tool. I'm going to heat it up a little bit before I start going, just to keep the warping down a bit and to speed up the embossing itself. As you watch, you're going to see as it melts, it's going to get shiny. And like I said, that VersaFine gives a very nice glossy detailed look to our butterflies. Alrighty, so we've done ink smushing and heat embossing so far. The next thing we're going to do is cut out our butterflies. Now obviously, if you don't have a die cut machine, you can just fussy cut them out. Just use a pair of small snip scissors and cut carefully around. Turn your paper, not your scissors, if you're going to be fussy cutting things. I have a die cut machine, and I love having a die cut machine. I am not a good fussy cutter or straight cutter or any other kind of cutter, so I love having my die cut machine. My main manual die cut machine is a Cricut Cuttlebug, and it's a great one. There's lots of other ones available too, but what we're going to do, we're going to put the die right over, and I might have to bring this out of your frame for a bit because I need to try to line that up the best that I can. Once I get that lined up, I'm gonna put a couple pieces of low-tack tape. I'm just using washi tape for this today, just so that that die doesn't wiggle around as I get it on here. Okay. For your die cut machines, you're going to make what's called a sandwich with your different plates. For the Cuttlebug, your A plate is your thick base plate that goes on the bottom. Your B plate is your cutting plate. As you can see, mine has lots and lots of cuts in it, but that's where our die is going to cut into. And then our C plate is our top plate that goes on top of that. So we're going to layer all of these together, and we are going to crank them through. As you get close to the die, you're going to notice that it's a little harder to crank. You might even hear some cracking. That is totally fine and normal. That's how these work, because of the extra pressure needed to push down to get the die through. I can turn it over and see that it did cut all the way through. Take off my tape, and there I have my pretty butterfly. Alrighty, let's do another one here. That time you heard the cracking as it went through. It's not cracking the plate, it's just the sound of it working and cutting. We have a second butterfly, and then we'll do our last one. And for this last one, I'm going to show you another option. This is my main, the Cuttlebug is my main cutting machine, but you can get smaller die cut machines. Obviously, you're not going to be able to do large things in it, but if you need something a little bit cheaper, or you want something that works good for travel, they have these little mini die cut machines, and this one's going to be plenty big for what we're doing here. Obviously, we're going to have to cut our butterfly smaller to fit through there because this paper is too wide, but we can trim that down. Again, we can line up our die the best that we can and tape it. And generally you want your tape to go to the outside, because if your tape is a little too sticky, you sure don't want it to stick and rip to your design that you're going to be using. Okay, for these little ones, they have just 2 plates, very thin plates. There's the base plate there, and there's the cutting plate here. Again, make sure that your cutting side of your die is touching your cutting plate. A lot of times I'll just put my base plate on top, but you can also just sandwich them together and flip it over if you want to keep your cutting plate on top. It works the same way. Crank it through. And there we have our third butterfly. And as you can tell, I've made several butterflies. We're only going to actually need 2 today, unless I decide to use any of the others as other decorations. But for our spinners, we're going to use those butterflies. Alrighty. So there's 2 techniques that we've learned so far. Let's get into making the card itself. I'm going to start with our 6x6 paper, and we're going to cut it down to our mat size that goes on our card. This time I'm going to make it the exact size of the front, and I'm not going to leave that border around there. So I am going to want, let's go this way first, 5.5. So that's just going to leave the little 1/2-inch strip, and by 4.25. Again, I'm putting my design where I wanted it. I could cut off both sides if I had a different design that I wanted more of a middle spot. This one is going to work just fine like that. And the next thing we're going to do with this is we're going to die cut again. As you notice, this card has a window cut in it, and so we're going to take our little circle and cut our window out of the front. Again, we want to try to line this up as close to even on both sides and decide what part we want cut I'm thinking right there looks really good, but I am going to double check it with my centering ruler just to see if that's pretty close to center. So that'll be 2 1/8 inches on each side, and the die comes to about 1 1/8 on each side. So I think that looks like pretty good placement. I like the 2 little rosebuds being cut out there that we're going to use elsewise. Again, we're going to put some of the washi tape on to hold our die down. And as you can see, our card front is too big. It wouldn't have fit in the little die cut machine, but it'll work just fine in this one. Again, lay down on your cutting plate with the edge, the cutting edge of your die facing down. Top it with your next plate and roll it through. All right, and there we have our card front with the window cut out of it. Next thing I'm going to do, just to make sure we've got everything ready before we actually put the card together, I'm going to do our sentiment for the bottom. Now you notice in this card I did another cut, die cut there out of some silver metallic cardstock, and I used one of these dies that just happened to fit the size of my circle for the inside part perfectly, and then put a little pretty scallop border, so that made a nice little frame around for this one in the silver, which is really pretty. I also used the die cutting to cut the word believe from another set of dies that I have. This one has several different sayings: believe, loved, joyful, hope, family, memories, thankful, blessed, grateful, faith. A lot of those are good encouragement sentiments for a card also. And then, as you can see in this one, with the center part there, I just adhered it onto the inside of the card, so we've got a pretty little design there. We're going to do a little bit different with this card and see how that turns out, but this is the same type of look we're going for. Okay, so I said we were going to do the sentiment for this one next, and the sentiment we're going to stamp onto a piece of vellum, which is see-through. This paper is so pretty, I did not want to cover it up with another piece of cardstock with a sentiment on it. And so I'm going to use vellum that is see-through, and actually I believe the piece I have here is tracing paper. Again, something inexpensive that you might have at home that will work for doing this. And so you're going to take your piece of vellum. This is a little harder to cut straight, and I recommend when you cut it that you put a piece of cardstock underneath it as you cut, just so you don't rip the edges apart. We are going to emboss this one. We're going to use our silver embossing powder for this one, so I'm going to use the clear ink and powder it up with my anti-static bag so that we don't get embossing powder stuck where we don't want it to be. The stamp I'm going to use is a wood stamp, so I'm going to use my stamp positioner again so that I can try to get it as straight as I can on there. But I don't want to dip into my Versamark sticky ink to use my stamp positioner, so I can just use any old ink. I am just going to grab my potting soil archival ink. I just need something that I can see my stamp positioner. I on my acetate piece here so that I can get this about as centered as I can. I didn't get a good stamp there, but that's okay. I just need to see where it's gonna go. I want to get that brown cleaned off of my stamp here, so I'm gonna rub that off really well. Alrighty, and so we're gonna line this up as centered as we can over our vellum piece and as straight as we can. The thing with these rubber stamps is they're not always glued on straight here, so you're not always going to get a nice straight line. So let's put this on here as best as we can. Line that up. Ink our sentiment up with our Versamark clear sticky ink again. Hold this down so that it holds our vellum in place. Move the plastic sheet and line this up in the corner and push down. Okay. Because I've got such a small piece there, I am going to use my tweezers to hold this to do the embossing. And this is going to blow around quite a bit, so I'm going to hold it as close to the center as I can without touching any of the places where it's embossed. Get my scratch piece of paper out again, and this time I'm using a silver embossing powder. Making sure it covers all of the words and that it didn't stick anywhere else. Move this out of the way. Obviously you don't want to use your heat gun over that, or you will emboss all of that ink and lose it, all that powder and lose it. So let's do this one. Silver. Let's hit it one more time. It looks like it's shinier in some spots than others. There we go. I don't know how well the camera is picking up, but that's nice and shiny there. Okay. The other thing in working with vellum or other clear type papers or plastics or acetates is if you put any glue or tape or other type of adhesive on the back, it is going to show through, and so you don't want to do that. Like I said, I don't want to put cardstock or anything behind this. Obviously it's going to be subtle, but I don't want to. So what I'm going to use is my Xyron sticker maker. This is a 1.5 inch size. Obviously, you don't need a bunch of different sizes, but because I also have a 1 inch size, I'm going to use this one because I want to waste as little as possible. And so I try to pick the size based on that. So you put your thing you want to turn into a sticker into the top there. You pull the paper down the bottom here, and that back paper has the adhesive on it, and the front paper is going to keep the adhesive from being around the side. So rip it off once you get to the end. I'm going to press hard to get all that extra sticky onto the extra paper, the front paper, and we're going to peel that off. And all that extra adhesive is going to be stuck to this front clear paper to be thrown away. And what we have left here is our vellum with adhesive all over the back, so it will stick and no adhesive will show through. So I'm going to put that on next. While we're working with it, we might as well get it done and figure out where exactly we want that to be. Line it up the best we can and just put it on like a sticker. Alrighty. Next thing we're going to need is our card base, obviously. I've already cut a card base. We already talked about that in the last video. But we're going to need our die cut machine again because obviously we have to cut a hole out of this too. So we're going to line up, and actually I think I could have cut through, I think on the last one I did cut through both layers at the same time. I just didn't remember to do that this time. So this time I'm taking my die and fitting it right in to that hole so that I can get it exactly centered. I don't want to cut the hole any bigger. I want it to be exactly the same size, but like I said, I'm pretty sure on this one I cut through both layers at the same time, so you can do that. We're ready to start putting the card together. We have that extra circle. We could use it for something else. We have our holes cut through both layers. And so the next thing we're going to do is center our string up. And again, I'm using a nylon thread here. It's a clear thread. I'm going to use score tape to hook this on because I want something really sticky that's going to hold it down really well. So I'm going to put a couple pieces under my circle there, and I'm going to put a couple pieces above my circle. Going to not cut this off yet just because I find that's easier to help align it. I'm going to take just this top one off for now. That's under the circle. I'm going to bring back in my centering ruler and get this centered at 2 1/8 on each side and put my thread right there in the center with enough of a tail underneath there that it'll go down to my next piece. So I'm going to line that up in the center the best that I can and get it stuck down into the tape the best that I can. And then we're going to come up to the top and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to line up evenly on both sides, pull our thread up right through the 0 mark there. Get it as straight as we can. And we're going to push it down into the tape there. Now we can take the other tape off just to help get it stuck down, and I put the little pieces back on top for right now since I don't want to lose the stickiness off of that before I use it. So there we go, cut down, and we've got our little spinning mechanism ready to put our butterflies on. So I'm going to pick a couple of butterflies that I want to use here. I'm going to put a little strip of the score tape. This is really, really good adhesive, which is why when I'm using anything that's interactive, that's going to get a lot of movement, I like to use the score tape. It's what I use when I make albums, photo albums and things like that. So I'll put a little piece behind my butterfly there. And then I'm going to line him up right underneath the center of that string. Butterflies are great because we can get right between his antenna and right down the center of his tail. Second butterfly, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to add more adhesive around the rest of him also so that he'll stick well to the other one. So I'll put a little in his wings. As well as the center strip there. And you could use your liquid adhesive glue after, around the sides besides your center score tape there. This is in my hand, so this is what I'm using. Okay. And we'll peel off all these tape backings. And then we're going to line the butterflies up as perfectly as we can. This again is a good reason to use the die cuts instead of cutting by hand, because it's going to be more precise, because they're going to be exactly the same. We can't always line up perfectly, but that's okay. These are homemade cards, and handmade can look handmade, that is fine. Okay, now we're going to add our front over the top there. So we're going to add our adhesive to that. Again, I like using my ATG gun for card fronts, except for when it decides to mess up like that. But an inexpensive and easy way to add the adhesive. Remove that little goober there. Go around all the sides. Go around our circle so that it sticks down well. And add a little more across across our bottom so that we get good adhesion there. Now we can take off these little extra pieces of backing and put that over there. That extra tape wants to stick to me. Everything wants to stick to me right now. Let's get that glue dot out of the way. There we go. Okay. For this, because I cut it the exact same size, I can line it up by holding the center, by putting it down, and we line up pretty good. Not perfect, but not bad. And there we have our butterfly. Now we could just leave it with the plain background there. The other way that we could do it would be like we did in this card. Let's see how that looks to put that down in there. I like it. I think it adds, but I'm going to do one more thing before I decide if I'm going to put it down. Generally, and on this card, I laid that in before I put the thread and the spinner in. I would recommend doing that. I forgot to this time, because if you do it that way, before you have this center stuff in, you can just fold your card like this, line up your pieces exactly, put your ATG tape on the back of there, or glue or whatever you're using, and just line this up perfectly and push it down, and then open your card. So do it before you put your spinner in. I didn't, and we're going to decide whether we want to put it on there, because there's one more thing that I wanted to do on the inside of this card. Clean up our mess here, and let's look at this. Okay, on this one, as I said, I just put that in the center, and that worked great for this one. What I'm going to do for this one, I'm going to use some of that picked raspberry ink, only this time I'm using the archival ink, which is not as water reactive, so it's a little bit more detailed, like the VersaFine, except for in colored. And I had found this stamp that fits around that perfectly, which means I'm going to have to do something before I decide whether I'm going to put this down, because I want to stamp this perfectly around that circle on the inside. Remember, I said we've got one from the card too. So what I'm going to do is take just a tiny bit of my tape runner. I'm going to touch it a bit to de-stickify it a bit, just make it a little less tacky. And I'm going to put it behind my window here. We'll see how well I do at lining this perfectly up. I think the best way to do this, lay it down, line it up in the circle, and then close it. And then I've got it right where I need it to be. Okay, what I want to do is stamp this pretty floral design around my inside circle there. I am going to want to protect the top part of that card, so I'm going to lay my scratch paper right up against that fold. I'm going to stand up so I can try to line this up as best as I can right around that circle before putting it down, and then press down on my stamp. And I did not do a good job, and I'm going to bet that I'll do an even worse job if I try to redo it. So what can you do when you have a mess up like this? And I'd even thought of this ahead of time and didn't do it, if I'd used the stamp positioner to my Stamp-A-Majig, you can use that even with your clear block stamps. It's made for use with your others, but even for this, like I said, I don't think I can line this up. I may try anyhow. With my head above there. If I get a really bad impression here, what can I do? I can always take another piece of cardstock and glue it inside. Actually, I think that turned out okay. It's not exact probably, but it looks pretty good to me, so it works. What could have I done if it didn't? I could have cut another piece of cardstock, layered it in here on top of that, and covered that up completely, and we would have been just fine. Okay, so now we've got a design here. We could put another stamped sentiment in here if we want. We could just leave this open to write a hand sentiment greeting in there. Like I said, we can either leave this just open like that, or we can put our design in there. Your card, you can do however you want. I'm gonna think just a minute and decide how I want. Like I said, I'm going to think for a bit and decide if I want to put that inside, if I want to stamp a sentiment inside. But basically, my card, the basics of it are done. To add a little bling and extra decoration, you can always add some little gemstones or pearls. I have some laying out somewhere here. There, I think these ones would match great. I can use the orange, the pink, or the blue. Any of those would be good. I'll add a few more of those on there, and I'll come back and show you what I end up deciding to do. But just as is here, I think I'm probably going to add that. I think I like that, having more design rather than just the plain. Again, you just spin on your thread, close your card, and when you open it, your butterfly flies. So, do what you can of these techniques, depending on what supplies you have at home, what supplies you're able to get and want to get. And be sure to post your cards to our Facebook group for the 12 Months of Wholeness Through Creativity. Like I said, check out the blog for some other simple cards, other designs of other simple cards. And I would say today is a great day to go spend some time in your happy place and do some crafting. You have a great day. Bye-bye. I am back with a quick little PS for our 3rd month encouragement card. As you can see, I went ahead and decorated the card a little bit more, jazzed it up. As you notice, I added the circle inside. I decided I liked that. And I used some more of the butterflies that I had already done. I put one of them on the inside just with my tape runner. On the outside, I added 5 of the little gemstones and a couple more butterflies. And as you notice, these butterflies are popped up a bit to add a little bit more dimension to the card. Now, I'll show you how I did that, and I had recorded that, and that recording didn't work, so I'll show you with another butterfly that I have. But what I do is I just bend on both sides of the butterfly body. So we've got that small little area of his body that we can put our adhesive on. Now that's pretty narrow for most of the types of adhesive that we use. I do have some very fine ones that I could use, but I want to show you how you can do it with just your plain old regular glue. And so once you've got your bend there, and again, we don't want glue oozing out because we don't want those wings to be stuck down. So a little tip that I like to do is just take a little bit of my non-toxic glue and put it on the back of my hand. And then I can take my small little area, and you can do this even with little tiny embellishments using your tweezers, and just take those small things and just tap, tap, tap in the glue. You get it only on the part that you need. You don't get too much so it won't ooze out, and then you can just lay it down and glue it on. Don't want to glue that one on, so I'm going to wipe that glue off. But there you have it, one other little tip that you can use, and my finished spinner cards. So again, I believe today's a great day to go spend some time in your happy place. So go spend some time crafting in your happy place and have a fantastic day.